Hey, this is Big John Summers, and I want to thank you so much for listening to the Tennessee History Nerd. By the way, if you enjoyed this episode, I want you to know that there's a lot more content waiting for you out there. We're adding new episodes every week, and we're working our way across the whole state of Tennessee, covering stories from prehistory all the way into the 20th century. So if you like Tennessee history, there's already a catalog of stories out there for you to explore. So, scroll back through those previous episodes. You might just find something you weren't expecting. And again, thanks so much for listening. Okay, so today, got a treat. We are at the Old Stone Fort. I'm speaking with Keith Wimberley, who is a park ranger and is actually the park manager at Old Stone Fort. And before the interview, he told me he'd been doing this, I think it was 16 years.
I've been the park manager for 16 years, yes. I've been a park ranger for just barely over 30 years.
And you said 30 years and 1 month, so that tells me you count it pretty closely.
It just happened to remember, yeah. It just very recent, yeah.
So you've been doing it for 30. So the first half of your career, you were other places.
No, I've actually been here at this park for 26 of those 30 years.
Okay.
I was one of the original park rangers at the Bicentennial Capitol Mall State Park in Nashville when it opened in 1996. And I was there for 4 years, and then I'm from Manchester, so I was able to come back home. I've been here ever since.
Okay. So this is home, so this is definitely, kind of not been something that would have been new to you then. This would have been something that you would have known about. And of course, we were talking before the interview. This opened actually in 1966.
April 23rd, 1966. So we're actually coming up on 60 years here in a few days.
And the interesting thing is, if I'm not mistaken, this episode is going to air that week.
Oh, wow.
So
crazy.
So and it's completely unplanned because I didn't know that till we got here to start doing this. But yes, and so one of the things that as I've been, of course, being from Coffee County myself, this is something that has a very rich history. It's got a very rich prehistory history. And then it's got even, you look in the 19th century from an industrial standpoint, and it really ties into how Manchester got its name, ties into right here in this spot. But I don't want to get too far ahead of things. One of the things that you were just mentioning, I do want to make sure we don't lose sight of that. I was mentioning that in addition to doing the Tennessee History Nerd podcast, I'm also doing Dauphin Island Diaries, and it's interesting the intersection between the two that I've been discovering. And you said, I can think of one right off the top of my head. So I'm going to let you just tell us about that.
Yeah, so there are different theories about how the Old Stone Fort was built and such. We strongly believe that it was a prehistoric Native American site, but others believe that a Welsh prince named Prince Madoc built the site as truly as a fort, but he was believed to have come ashore to to what is known as America through the Mobile Bay in Alabama. So yeah, that's definitely a connection to your two different types of podcasts or locales for your podcast.
That is really interesting, and one of the things I'm planning on doing with these is for several of the episodes I was planning on tying Tennessee history with a similar theme in Alabama with the Gulf Coast. And what I was looking at doing was, of course, the prehistory here, and then there are a number of middens on Dauphin Island that go to probably the Creeks and other Indians of that area that would go out and harvest oysters and cook them on the island, and those just throw them in a pile, and over time that grew up, and they call them middens. That was kind of where I was looking to make the connection. Didn't even know about the Prince Madoc, Madoc. You said Madoc. I've heard it pronounced.
Yeah.
Didn't even know that connection. I mean, I knew of him supposedly coming through this area, but I didn't know the Mobile connection on that.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
So let's go then to the prehistory, where very strongly believe you said that this was Native American cultures. Who would that have been, and when would that have been?
Yeah, so there's according to carbon dating in the different areas of the site, this ceremonial site was built 1,500 to 2,000 years ago, so prehistorically. So we don't know what prehistoric peoples called themselves, but there's 4 periods of Native American prehistory, and this was built during the woodland time period of prehistory.
Okay.
So tribal names are historic names rather than prehistoric. So again, we don't know what the prehistoric peoples called themselves, so we just refer to them after their time period.
Okay.
The names Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Shawnee, names like those are historical tribal names.
Mm-hmm. And I know that in this area, and I don't know how far back they go, I know before the Cherokee, there were the Uchis, and even some of those were still around when DeSoto came through, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I believe so. And Middle Tennessee was more of a shared hunting ground with historic tribes. There was not one specific tribe known to be in this area, like Cherokee were more to the east and Chickasaw to the west and such as that. But Middle Tennessee is believed to be more of a shared hunting ground during those times.
Okay. And so, from the standpoint of, okay, this is prehistory, we don't know who those people were, we don't know what they called themselves. I know that in the state of Tennessee, there are 2 archaeological state parks, this one and Pinson Mound, or Pinson Mounds, plural. Is there a correlation between, do you think, that the Pinson Mound group and those who were here, or would they have been two completely separate peoples?
I believe it's during the same time period, but they were during the woodland time period. They were living in small family groups here and there. They didn't have huge numbers of people like they did in the Mississippian period and places Cahokia like that. So it was much smaller groups during that time period. So they were both mound builders, although there were different types of mounds. They were both mound builders, so they had some of the same technology or engineering going on at the time. But as far as how related they were, it's kind of hard to say.
Okay. And this was believed to be it was not believed to be military or defensive in any kind of nature. It was ceremonial.
Yeah, when the first settlers came to this area, they saw a big, almost 50-acre field surrounded by mounds, and they just assumed it was a defensive structure, or to keep for protection or such. But several ways that we believe that probably not to be true is that something this size would have taken hundreds and hundreds of people to defend, and as I already mentioned, during the woodland time period, they only had small groups, family groups, traveling around. They were just starting settling down from their nomadic lifestyle in the Archaic period, and so something like I said, it would have taken hundreds of people to defend, and then they weren't fighting very much prehistorically, so they didn't really need a place for defense. And then also the cliffs on the Old Stone Fort is surrounded by 2 rivers. The cliffs on the opposite sides of the river in some places are much higher than the cliffs inside the river, so spears could easily be thrown down or thrown across the site or something like that. And there's also no evidence of palisades or walls on top of the mounds. And then also the mounds apparently were never tall enough to keep anybody in or out without the palisades. So those are some of the ways that we believe it shows it was not a defensive or fort, as it was misnamed by the early settlers.
Okay. And then, if I remember correctly, there's also kind of a celestial orientation as well, correct?
Yes. And it's really cool. According to the carbon dating, the last part of the site built we refer to as the entrance complex. That originally consisted of 2 parallel mounds and 2 conical mounds at the beginning, and then those 2 parallel mounds actually pointed to summer solstice sunrise, the first day of summer, the longest, obviously, day of the year. So it's it's pretty spectacular that, if it was built for fort or by the Welsh or wherever, why would they have done something like that? That's something that Native Americans did. Many, many different sites across the eastern United States pointing at different celestial events.
Okay. And this, you said, was built by hand, would have been built using the technology of the time, which was basically stone tools and wicker baskets, hand-woven wicker baskets, basically.
Yeah, and there were originally about 4,000 feet of mounds, and it's all made of stone and dirt. There's no burials that have been found, and a large majority of the mounds have the mounds are made of two different types of stone: limestone and shale. Limestone, of course, is one of our state rocks, so it's very prevalent and readily accessible. But the shale is actually only occurs at the river elevation. So these cliffs are 80 to 100 feet tall. So the people were having to bring that shale all the way up the the bluffs and such, and there's tons and tons of rock that they had to move by hand, like you said, with baskets or hand load or whatever. You can easily see why it would take 400 to 500 years to build the site.
And that was kind of where I was going with that. How long do we think that it took to achieve that?
Yes, reportedly about 400 to 500 years, and many generations. And they didn't live here, so they were coming here from couple different areas. That it was built in a couple or two different phases. One's referred to as the McFarland phase, and then the other one's referred to as the Owl Hollow phase. McFarland is around the Normandy area, and Owl Hollow is around the current Thames Ford Lake area. So it was not a habitation site. It was strictly a site for whatever type of ceremonies they would have had prehistorically.
If you're a business with a strong connection to history, education, travel, or place-based storytelling, and you're looking to reach an audience that values those things, we should talk. You can reach me at john.summers@summersmediaenterprises.com. Now, let's get back to our story. So, when I was growing up and lived in Coffee County before I moved in the 4th grade, one of the things I was told for years, and you would probably know better than I would about the veracity of this, but there's a brick house that is directly across what used to be the tail end of Highway 53. It's now what goes down in between I'll say the Deadman Park and the Rec Center. That brick house that's there next to Duck River is on an elevated piece of terrain there. And I've been told all my life that was an Indian mound that they built on, but in the days before that was considered illegal.
Yes, there's it's next to the Little Duck River, and it's never been, to my knowledge, or I've never seen results if it was that it was actually tested to be proven whether it was a Native American mound or it could be a remnant, just an geologic remnant from where the river washed around it and left that raised area. But like I said, I've never heard of it being tested officially to know which one it is.
That's so that kind of answers the question I was about to ask as a follow-up, is if that's the case, was it in any way related to this site? Would it have been, because it's, as the crow flies, it's less than a mile.
Yeah, I think it would have definitely been related to this site. We have a local archaeologist that's doing a lot of different studies and looking for other mounds and things like that. But yeah, it would have definitely been related, I believe, if it is truly a mound.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, do we know, or is it only at this point conjecture as to what types of ceremonies would have been done here? I mean, obviously there would have been some sort of ceremony associated with the summer solstice, but what else do we know?
Yeah, that's kind of a common thing with prehistory. It is a lot of conjecture because we don't know exactly what happened, but through much investigation from archaeologists and things like that. But with the sunrise, they weren't necessarily worshiping the sun, but more so honoring it for the season, the growing season, the animals being really active and abundant, and that helped them basically prepare for the entire year. So, like I said, it's not necessarily worshiping the sun, but honoring it more so. They probably had sporting events of different kinds. There's different sporting events that are sporting types that we kind of program with here, being the atlatl or the chunky stone or one such as that. So they probably had sporting events of different kinds. They probably had religious ceremonies, I'm sure, and then hunting was also a very sacred or ceremonial thing to them as well. So I'm sure that took place in the enclosure also.
And then with regard to, you mentioned two different kinds of rock. You had the mounds, you had the rock. How exactly were the walls of the fort constructed? Because one of the things I've heard was that rock would have been decorative.
Yeah, well, stickball was the other game I was trying to think of.
I almost said that.
Yeah, I was trying to think of it, but
that was a brutal game.
Yeah, oh yeah, yes, for sure. But the construction of the mounds is kind of interesting. Again, it's made of limestone and shale. There's a couple different ways they did it. The main mounds were built with limestone cores on each side, and then they would put the shale layer at the bottom and then cap it with dirt. And that was the main, but there were apparently certain areas that the shale was left exposed, and it would shimmer with the sunshine and sun shining on it. So that would have been the glimmering part.
Would there have been any, some things I've seen like where they would put, and I don't know if that was done here, but they would have shale and then they would have like places interspersed where it would be like quartz or something along those lines that would at night would look almost like the stars?
Yeah, I think they probably did that other places, but I'm not aware of it being done here.
Okay.
Not that it wasn't for sure, but we're not aware of any such sites.
Okay, and so then going back to the games you were talking about, atlatl, and then you mentioned stickball, and it's interesting that you mentioned stickball. I was just last week. I was over in East Tennessee. I was talking to Charlie Rodarmer, who's the director at the Sequoia Birthplace Museum. They call stickball, the Cherokee word for stickball, little brother of war is what they called it. And it really was a brutal game. Same thing for the Creek Indians. And so it sounds like it was probably something from what I'm understanding from you where that might have been a game that they inherited from the people who were here before, whatever they called themselves.
Yeah, I'm sure it was definitely a sport that was passed down. It's basically the predecessor, if that's the right word, for modern day lacrosse. If you've ever watched men's lacrosse, women's can get pretty violent as well, but nothing compared to the men's lacrosse. So if you ever watch men's lacrosse, yes, it definitely can be a very, very violent sport. Interesting to watch. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I was being told was, that people have to be carried off, from concussions and broken limbs, and so yeah, it's definitely not for the faint of heart.
Right.
So yeah, and then how long would this site have been used for that type of activity? When would that have ended?
It's hard to say, but probably at least by the year 500, when you're progressing into the Mississippian time period, when they're starting to have huge villages with thousands of people and hundreds of mounds in one site. You may have heard of the mound site of Cahokia in southwest Illinois. just across the Mississippi River from St. Louis. That's the largest mound site in North America. So, to me, I think about smaller groups like these, smaller areas, smaller camps, smaller people groups, kind of gathering together in a place like that. So at least by the year 500, they were probably gone.
So why would it have ceased with the larger groups to be as important?
That's a hard question. Again, I think it's just the changing of the time periods and the peoples where they wanted to start living in larger groups. I don't really have a good answer for that, unfortunately.
Okay, and then so it basically just sat here until European settlers start coming in, and they think it's breastworks, they think it's some sort of defensive position, and they call it a stone fort, and that name is stuck. That's what we still use today, Old Stone Fort.
Yeah, and it's pretty interesting. The earliest maps are from the early 1800s, so it's been known for a long, long time. When it was actually named a fort, not real sure, but yeah, it's just it's been known for a long time, since not too long after the Native Americans were gone, relatively speaking.
Okay, yeah, I know that there were folks in this area. I know that like the Fort Nash out in the Beech Grove area, it was commissioned in like the early 1790s. It was even pre-revolutionary, not pre-revolutionary, but pre-statehood. It was pre-statehood that was commissioned by Governor Blunt. So there were people in this area. Obviously, there was a stockade there that was trading route here. There were people already of course, in Nashville. There was the Warriors Path that ran up through this area through like Bell Buckle and War Trace, hence the name War Trace. So those people would have been the ones who were coming in this area, knowing it was here from a European settler standpoint, or of European descent. They were, I would say most of them were American born. But then you move into the early 1800s. We're talking, 30 years later maybe.
Right.
And you start seeing industry. And of course, the town Manchester, if I remember my history from Mrs. Carden's class at New Union when I was a kid, Manchester was named such because they believed it was going to be a major industrial town like Manchester, England.
Correct. Right. It was named after Manchester, England, which is known for its abundant industry. And it started off pretty well here in Manchester as far as the industry. There was just here on the site of the park, there was many, many different types of industry. There were several different paper mills. There was a rope factory. There was supposedly even an oil well on the site.
No kidding.
Not seen much history on it, but there's maps that show an oil well on the site, and then a gunpowder mill for the Confederacy during their early parts of the Civil War. So it's definitely a major. It started off pretty gangbuster, and the one of the paper mills was made from old clothes or old rags. The rags would be turned into paper, leaving buttons everywhere, and people thought later, after they come and rediscovered it, if you will, they see the buttons laying everywhere and just assumed it was a button factory. But it was a paper mill made from old clothes or old rags. But that one mill provided all the newspaper for Nashville, Chattanooga, Atlanta, and Memphis.
If you enjoy the way we tell stories here on the Tennessee History Nerd, there's another show you might want to check out, Dauphin Island Diaries. Same approach, different setting. Stories from the Gulf Coast, rooted in place and built from the sources up. You can find it wherever you're listening right now. And now, back to our story. Wow.
So, again, the industry started off pretty gangbuster and went until, I think it closed before 1800.
Okay.
Before 1900, I'm sorry. And then they tried to turn it into a tourism site.
So just what that makes me think of, I mean, one of the terms, of course, you rarely hear this anymore because you rarely hear of newspapers really anymore.
Right.
With the advent of the internet, newspapers are they feel much like a dinosaur. But used to be one of the terms of magazines and newspapers was a rag, and that came from exactly what you're talking about.
Never really even put that together myself, but yeah, it's so it was very, very interesting sight. And when you come to the park here, you can still see a remains of that mill here on the site.
One of the if I remember correctly, one of the major families involved in that, of course, down south of here, there's the community that still bears their name, Hickerson, were the family and there was actually a whistle stop down there between Manchester and Tullahoma, which is why it's known as Hickerson Station to many of us from this area. Actually, knew Mr. Will Hickerson, the last of the family. The
Hickersons and the Wootons were the main families that ran the mills here on the site, and there was also a Mr. Whitman that helped build the mills. But some of the Hickersons and the Wootons, and also Mr. Chumley, who owned the land, was actually a descendant of the Hickersons. Are buried in a cemetery here on the park's property as well.
That I did not know. That's interesting to know.
But Fanny Hickerson was the last owner of the mills.
And that was Mr. Will's sister.
Yeah, correct.
One of the interesting things I think, and it really ties, this is not just where it is, same location, but the forts, the Old Stone Fort itself ties directly into this. The term that is that I'm, if I'm not mistaken, that is used here is spolia, which means basically taking something from an old structure and repurposing it and using it in a new structure. And so you had all this limestone that was part of the fort walls that meant they didn't have to quarry some of that when they were creating the foundations for the mills. If I'm not mistaken, this side on the Duck River side, much of the wall has been repurposed. Is that correct?
It has been repurposed, but not for the mills, to my understanding. The stones for the mills themselves are much, much larger than they would have had to help to build the mounds. But a lot of the mounds were taken out in different areas for building roads. And then also building one of the parallel mounds at the entrance complex was mostly taken out to build a bridge across the Little Duck River, which led into town, what's known today as Fort Street. But as far as repurposing the mound stones for the mills, I'm not sure that was correct.
Okay. I'm not sure where I got that, but that was what I had understood, and that's the reason why I like to do these interviews, because I really like to make sure that I have my information correct, and that's how I find out, is by asking those questions. But yeah, I mean, even so, there was spolia that was going on for sure. It was just rather than being used for the foundation, it was used for basically for road structure,
roads and bridges.
And so the interesting thing for me, and you may be able to speak more to this. I don't know how much of this is. I know that there's an interpretive marker out next to the parking lot for this building, talking about the gunpowder mills. Those gunpowder mills didn't get their materials from here. That would have been brought in from elsewhere. Places, I'm going to presume, like Big Bone Cave over in Van Buren County would have been. There was a large saltpeter production facility there. There would have been places like that around the area that would have had to have been used for producing that gunpowder. Yes.
Yes, but actually there is a one on site.
There is.
There is what's referred to as Saltpeter Cave and Copper's Cave. They're more of rock shelters rather than actual caves. But yeah, they did source the saltpeter from
Okay.
from on site here.
And how much of that were they able to produce here? Because that's normally where you've got to have a good amount of guano.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact numbers. It was a pretty substantial amount of powder that they were producing here. It was built in 1861, and the Union destroyed it in 1862. So it wasn't in operation very long. But when it was operation, they were producing a lot of powder.
Mm-hmm. I knew there was a lot of powder being produced here, and so where would that mill have stood?
So it stood down at the confluence of the rivers,
Okay.
where the Little Duck meets the Duck, and we have a trail here on the park we call the Forks of the river, but it's actually a confluence than the split. But that's where it was, and we have some interpretive waysides down there telling you about the site and showing you it's hard to, unless you know what you're looking for. It's hard to see, but when you do know what you're looking for, there's a slough down there, and there's lots of brick left from the site and different components of the mill itself. But yeah, it's down where the two rivers come together.
Okay. And then what would have been? I'm going to say roughly in this area. You almost look out your window, and I probably can look out the window and see the dam.
Yeah, so we have a small, referred to as a weir dam here on the park, and there's really no significance to it. The man who owned the land, I mentioned earlier, John Chumley, built the dam to create a small lake, and then he could develop houses along the lake. But then the state bought it before he got more than one built, so kind of dodged a bullet there, if you will. But there's not really any significance to that dam.
Okay. So it's very similar in concept then to what Morton's Dam was upstream.
Exactly. Just quarter of a mile upstream was another dam called Morton's Lake or Morton's Dam. But yeah, same concept of developing.
This dam looks like, from what I remember of Morton's Lake Dam, this one was a little more substantial, maybe a little more permanently built. It was, I want to say, wooden and earth structure.
It's mostly concrete, I guess. It's mostly concrete. But yeah, like you said, Morton's Lake wasn't quite as constructed quite as well. And it failed once, and I think they rebuilt it, and it failed again, and they just finally removed it. You can kind of still see some of the abutments from it, but just remove the part from inside the river. Yeah.
And that made a huge difference from what I remember this stream being when I was a kid. There were times it was almost dry.
Yes.
Because of the dam upstream holding the water back, what there was. Now there's a good flow here.
Yes. Yeah. It never really stops. Rarely, every now and then, it'll actually stop flowing over the top, but there's a little spillway around the side of it that never really stops.
Okay. And then the mills that were downstream from this, were they all just built to operate off of the flow of the river itself, or was there a dam and a mill race built for that?
As far as the paper mills and such, I believe they were all water power, but there was a mill and a race for the powder mill. Yeah.
Okay.
Mill race.
Did that race get blown, or is it still there? Can you still see it?
No. You can kind of see the trench for it and such, but
okay.
They did a really good job of destroying it.
Union made sure it wasn't going to be rebuilt.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So then we move past the 1860s. The war is over. All of that's gone. From the standpoint of the gunpowder mill, the other mills, you said the paper mill was still here until about the turn of the century.
Correct. I think it closed right around 1900 or just before. And then Miss Fanny tried to make a tourism site out of it, and actually got some momentum going, and some of the politicians of the time actually proposed legislation to make it a national park in D.C. And that ultimately failed. and then more locals got involved. Archaeologists and such got involved and did get it to become a state park under Governor Clement.
I was going to say, that sounds about when Frank G. Clement was.
Yeah, 1966.
So there are, of course, new state parks coming online fairly regularly, and even some of the existing state parks are being revised. You know, the one that the up on in the area around Sewanee, was at the Head of the Crow or something up there. That's I had never heard of that till I was up there a few weeks ago, but it basically is an old park that has been basically divided, renamed, kind of thing. But there's also some things that are going on around some of the old railroad systems where there is basically a Rails to Trails program where they're converting those into trail hiking trails. Of course, the railroad here is still active. I found that out earlier today when I got trying to get back across the tracks, and Caney Fork and Western was blocking the tracks a little bit. But so there's not really an opportunity there. But to get to the point I had on this is a park that's been here about 60 years. How does that compare to other state parks? How long have we had a state park system, and where does that fit into that whole hierarchy or that whole seniority kind of thing there?
Yeah, so Tennessee State Parks was first established in 1937. So we're 30 years into but what you were referring to on the mountain, what used to be referred to as South Cumberland.
South Cumberland, yes,
was split into 3 parks: Savage Gulf, which includes Stone Door, and then the Head of the Crow was split off. It's near Sewanee. It's named after Crow Creek. So the Crow Creek starts in that park, and then South Cumberland itself was renamed Fire Gizzard.
Fire Gizzard, yes.
So there's 3 parks there, and then the railroad you mentioned is they're making a trail.
The Mountain Goat.
It's called the Mountain Goat Trail. It goes all the way from Montego, Tracy City. It's going to eventually go all the way down to Cowan. So yeah, they're doing a lot of neat stuff up there, and our governor has Governor Lee in the last 7 years. He's got one left before his administration ends, but he's already established 7 new parks and supposed to have 7 more before the end of this year. So Governor Lee has been very, very supportive of parks and just outdoor recreation in general. And the 2 or 3 governors before him were pretty favorable to parks as well, but not to the degree that Governor Lee has been. But you mentioned earlier that we're one of 2 official state parks, archaeological parks in Tennessee. Other parks have many parks have components of archaeological sites, such as Mound Bottom, that's associated with Harpeth River, and Sellers Farms, and now associated with Cedars of Lebanon. And we're actually, I think I can say this, but there'll be a new archaeological park in McMinnville called Cardwell Mountain. It's just above
Cumberland Caverns.
The mountain above Cumberland Caverns. So that'll be one of the new parks coming online very soon. And we just opened Devil's Backbone in West Tennessee, and so there's other ones. I don't want to get too far into the weeds here. I don't know how far I'm supposed to, or how much I'm able to say, but there's many cool parks, different cultural parks, natural parks, different types of parks. That's really cool. So we were, like I said, about 29 years into the before we were formed.
If you've been enjoying the Tennessee History Nerd, there's a way to take a little piece of it with you. We've got merchandise available, shirts, hats, and more, so you can represent the show wherever you go. You can check that out at summersmediaenterprises.com/merch. And as always, thanks for listening. Now, let's return to the story. Okay. And so that means then you're looking at the 90-year anniversary next year for Tennessee State Park System then.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's correct.
So that's also interesting. So it was when you said that about Cardwell Mountain, that's of particular interest to me. I was a guide at Cumberland Caverns.
Oh, wow.
So
interesting.
Yeah, so that was, we hiked around to get to the historic entrance. It's about a mile hike around to where the original Higginbotham entrance was. And of course, that's from people in this part of the country. The Webb School down at Bell Buckle, they used to make annual pilgrimages there, and there's places all in there where you would find the Webb School where they would take their carbide lights or their candles or whatever they were using and use it to mark on the ceiling of the cave to let kind of early graffiti kind of thing.
Right.
And I know graffiti's bad, but then you see it in that situation and it's like, well, that gives us a record.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah. So then moving, you kind of went into where I was headed with this. So we're looking at this. This became a park in 1966. What was the process that happened through?
I don't know all the details, but there were several local individuals that had archaeological background and then also natural background. People like Mac Pritchard, who was our former state naturalist, he was involved. I'm drawing a blank on the other names, but the local, I think it was the JCs were involved, and just got the legislatures of the time to show how important. But this, I mean, it's a no-brainer to have the Old Stone Fort as a state park, if not a national park, but definitely a state park, just for its cultural significance. It's the largest mound site of its type, and it's been recognized by experts, if you will, as the most spectacularly sited woodland period site.
It is great with the confluence of the two rivers.
Yeah, it's really amazing with like the little duck and the duck on one side and on each side, and it's a extraordinary natural setting for sure.
So there's a book that you have in the gift shop that talks about the archaeology studies that were done, and that was back, I want to say about the same time that you're looking at this becoming a park.
Yeah, when the park was established, the University of Tennessee, led by Dr. Charles Faulkner, did major excavations at the site. There have been quite a few excavations before that, but the most detailed archaeological investigation was done when it became a park, again by UT and Dr. Faulkner in 1966, and we still have the original report that he wrote at that time. It went out of print. UT Press quit printing it, and we got permission to print it ourselves. So we reprint it and still sell that report in the gift shop.
And then I had the opportunity when I was in college at Middle Tennessee State. I actually took a class under the gentleman who was at that time the state archaeologist, and I do not remember his name. That's been nearly 40 years ago. But one of the things I know was even then that he had a dig going on that summer, was looking for volunteers, and if I hadn't had to work to make a living, I would love to have been a part of that at Pinson Mounds. Is there any kind of ongoing archaeological work that happens here from time to time, or are you just relying on that work that was done back in the 1960s?
Yeah, we don't have anything regular. We did have a gentleman who was actually a park ranger here for a very short time. His name's Stephen Yerka. He went back to school for his master's at UT.
He's in your video.
Yes, he's in our orientation video. But he left here from his ranger position and went back to school to get his master's and eventually doctorate at UT. But he did his thesis on this site, and so we did some excavations at that time as well. I believe it was 2008, if I'm not mistaken, but you can see his thesis online on the UT repository. Dr. Stephen Yerka, who now works with the Cherokee Nation in North Carolina.
So,
and then also there weren't any excavations involved, but our current interim director of interpretive programs and education for Tennessee State Parks, Hobart Aiken, also did his thesis on the site, and his is more about the history of how it became a park and what was going on the site beforehand. And
then, so what is the future for Old Stone Fort?
Our main purpose as a park is to preserve this site for many generations to come. It's been here for 2,000 years, and we want it to be here for that longer. So preserving the site is our main focus. As we mentioned before, it's a tremendously beautiful natural setting. So a lot of people, the majority of people, come for the natural rather than the archaeological aspect of the site. So when I do anything like this, I try to, anybody that's going to come visit, we want them to be mindful of the mounds, and that protecting those is the reason the park is here. So when they're making a beeline for the waterfalls, they don't need to cross the mounds to get to it. They need to use
You've got established trails.
Yeah, established trails, established boardwalks, steps, things like that, rather than just traipsing over the mounds. But being mindful and helping preserve them is our focus. We're currently in the process of getting a new campground bridge, and we're taking the old structure, which was moved here in 1970 from Franklin County, or the Franklin County line, to make a bridge into our campground. It's outlived its purpose with the RVs getting bigger and such. It can't handle the weight of those vehicles, so we're moving that structure, the truss structure. It's over 100 years old itself. We're moving that truss structure upriver and making it an overlook on one of our trails. So it's going to be really neat that we're not getting rid of it. We're still preserving it. We're not just blowing it up like they did on the one on the highway several years ago. So we're preserving it and going to have it as an interpretive piece and an overlook where people can still use it, and then have a new bridge leading into the campground. So that's kind of in the process right now. We hope to eventually have more improvements to our campground. A few years ago, we had a new shower house built and upgraded the electric on all the sites, and added a new parking lot for one of the restroom buildings, and improved the handicap sites that we had and such. So we've had some improvements, but the campground needs a lot more improvement. So we're hoping that will obtain funding for that in the next few years. We've built a few new trails in the last 5 to 10 years, especially over on the, I guess you'd be called the south side of the park, south or southwest side of the park, over off Powers Bridge Road. We have a Chumley Woods Trail, the Eagle Trail, and now the Powerline Trail, which is the only trail that we allow mountain bikes on in the park. That's pretty neat. And we've got our eyes on doing a couple other trails, possibly even a storybook trail.
Define storybook trail. I'm not familiar with that term.
Yeah, so storybook trail it's a short trail usually for children, but it has wayside markers that it's basically pages of a book. And they go along the trail and they read the different pages of the book as they go around.
Okay, there's actually something very similar to that at Reelfoot.
Yeah, so we have them in several different parks, and we had one in Manchester at our city park, but it got vandalized, and they've reopened it somewhere, and I'm drawing a blank to where that may be. Maybe at College Street Elementary, not sure, but that's been reopened somewhere in town. So we're just preserving the site and sharing it and teaching people about it. It's our main focus always.
Is there any plan to do any additional or updating to the interpretive markers and those kinds of things? I know one of the things I see around, and you see this in national parks a lot of times, you can actually almost trace in national parks how old the park is based on what markers are there, because you'll have like the ones like some of the old battlefields that they'll have the old War Department iron markers, and then you'll see the wooden markers that came later, and then now there's plastic markers that are out there, and you can almost say, okay, this was done in this period, and this was done. And I just wondered if there was any kind of updates like that you were thinking might be coming in.
We don't have any plans for updating the main interpretive panels on the enclosure trail at this time, but we may add some like on our nature trail. And surprised, I can't believe I forgot it, but we're actually in the process of working on some upgrades to our museum as well, and getting some couple new exhibits and finishing a project that we started many years ago with the MTSU. So those are some of the, as far as interpretation, those are things that kind of.
Well, and I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking, but I didn't want to be critical. I was thinking, the museum probably could use some updates. But
Yes, yeah. Like I said, we started a project many years ago and didn't get completed to our wishes. We ran out of different reasons.
Funding.
But funding was part of it, but we've gained some new funding and such, so we're hoping to have some new exhibits and complete the project soon.
Any kind of teaser you want to give on that as to kind of what you're looking at doing, or is that got to be a surprise?
Well, we're hoping to have a smart table and then also a 3D map of the site.
Okay.
So those are our two big things that we're really hoping for, and then finishing some of the captions and things on a little more explanation of the exhibits and things like that. But those are the two things I'm hoping for and kind of most excited about.
Is there any thought to doing any kind of interactive type of exhibits? I know that's something that I see in some places, especially where they're looking at doing education, like with small children. They allow them to have interactive type of exhibits that let them participate, and it helps them to remember things.
Yeah, there might be eventually some. You've probably seen at different museums. There'll be a question on top, and they flip the little thing up for the question for the answer, and so maybe some of those. But the 3D map will be interactive, where you can push certain buttons and certain portions of the park will light up and let you learn that way. Some other tactile things and drawers and stuff might be a possibility, but the interactive map and the flip charts maybe.
So there's one other question that's just occurred to me. This is kind of going out of the structure of what we've been following here. But one of the things that jumped out at me as I was coming in, I happened to look over. Of course, the leaves are just now starting to come out on the trees, so you can still see. And as I was coming up the hill, and it was just probably half a mile, quarter mile before you get to the entrance, it looked almost like breastworks that went across through the woods there. Like old breastworks. Was there any kind of military activity? I mean, I know we talked about the old stone fort. It's not a fort, but with the Confederates and trying to protect these gunpowder mills, would there have been any kind of military occupation or military presence around the area from a garrison standpoint?
There was no actual fighting activity, I guess you would say, but there was, get the word wrong, but bivouac site, or a sleeping area for actually both sides.
Okay.
On the little site here on the park where that took place. But as far as fighting, or breastworks, there's none here on the park. I think there were some very close to here, probably down in the downtown Manchester area, but not here on the park.
Okay. And then would there have been one of the things that also, as you go into town, just before you get to the bridge, it's on 41, but just where it goes over the Little Duck River right there, there's a historical marker there about Patton's maneuvers during World War II, or just before World War II. It was actually in the summer of 1941, so it was before we entered World War II, where they were doing maneuvers from the Camp Forest base at that time. Would any of that have taken place in this what's now the park? Because I know he actually finished up right outside of town, is where he won his maneuvers against the opposing force.
Yeah, there's none of that activity on the park that I've been aware of. Just pretty close to there, but it's going back to the Civil War time. But the old city cemetery, there's some burials of the Kentucky Brigade, old Kentucky Brigade that was in the area, and they had dances and things in the mill here at the park, and a lot of those soldiers are buried in the old city cemetery. There's kind of just a row of them, and a historical marker or a Civil War marker there as well. But none of the World War II training activities took place here that I'm aware of.
Well, just as the crow flies, again, we're really close.
Yeah,
really close. So it just occurred to me that there might have been some movement here. Although I would think, knowing the terrain in this particular part of it, wouldn't have been really conducive to tanks getting through.
Right.
So it would have had to have been, infantry, if there were infantry supporting that would have been what would have had to have been. But so what I do sometimes as we get close to the end of the things that we're talking through is I try to take a page out of Dan Rather's book, and I say, what have I not asked you that I should have asked you?
Nothing's coming to mind. You were pretty thorough today, I think. Just we love to have visitors, but again, our whole purpose of the park is preserving the old stone fort. So come enjoy it, but just be respectful and help us take care of it.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I appreciate being able to use your office for this also, and very much appreciate you being willing to talk with me today.
No, absolutely. The Old Stone Fort is a special site, so we definitely want people to know about how special it is. So thanks for including us.
Thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and we'll close it out. Thanks very much for listening, all of you who are joining us for this interview. Again, I've been interviewing Keith Wimberley, who is park ranger here and is the park manager of the Old Stone Fort State Archaeological Park. He's been very kind to allow me to use his office for this interview, and he's been very generous with his time. Very much appreciated. Thank you so much, sir.
And thank you again.
The Tennessee History Nerd is part of Summers Media Enterprises. In addition to the podcast, we produce short-form historical video content that you can find on our social media accounts on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And I'm also available on a limited basis for speaking engagements, presentations, and educational events. So if you're interested in having us to speak or collaborate with you, you can find more information through the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening.